Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Friday Morning at the Funhouse with Martin Popoff. Good morning, my friend. How
Yes,
are you today?
yes, doing fine, doing fine. This will be a fun one. The last one was good too. We got a lot of cool comments though.
Exactly. So the topic of today is part two of albums that most people out there seem to dislike, but we really enjoy quite a bit. So we understand that there's certainly going to be folks out there who like these albums too, but the general consensus most of the time when you talk about either fans of these bands or just the general acceptance or not acceptance when these albums were released is that these are kind of stinkers or subpar in the catalog, but we don't see any problem with them whatsoever. So we're going to make our case for why we like these. But again, it's just kind of a fun discussion of albums that seem to be maligned from these bands, but actually we enjoy quite a bit. So I'll have Martin kick us off with his number 5.
All right, excellent. So my number 5 is this one right here, Dio, Angry Machines. So, this is the second album with Tracee G, and Tracee G was just brutally maligned at the time when he came into Dio. He was there for Strange Highways, and they're still kind of in a major label situation at that point. And that album's kind of creative. A lot of people are kind of okay with it. It's a little bit weird. I'm definitely not a Lock Up the Wolves fan, and I'm definitely not a Magica fan or the last album, Master of the Moon. I don't like that super slow Dio, but this record got, and there's your back cover of her, shown weirdly as just a trio, right? Yeah. So this album got maligned mostly from Tracee G, and people didn't like when the band went out and played live. He was one of these guys who had a lot of his own personality put into things. He wasn't just going to play the old songs the way Viv did or whatever, Craig Goldie. But this album is like right from the start, I never had any problem with it. And I certainly had a problem with Magica and Master of the Moon. It's not that slow, number one. The riffs are pretty big and doomy, and they're interesting. The lyrics are pretty good. This is one of those records that was considered, what do traditional bands do when grunge is taken over and metal is not in fashion in any form whatsoever? There's industrial music out there. There's grunge. There's post-grunge. Alternative, hard alternative, and so Dio is in this. Everybody's already grumpy because he's knocked down to a minor label deal. We're on Mayhem at this point. Remember good old Paula, promoting all this stuff at the time, Paula Hogan. Yep. And it's showing them as a trio, and the graphics aren't great, although the album cover itself is pretty cool on it, right? Yeah. But so there were a lot of reasons to be kind of down on the whole Dio camp, but people were brutal about this album. They really did not like it at the time, and I really see no problem with it. It's groovy. There's melody. There's like I say, kind of doomy, cool riffs. Big Sister was cool. Who Controls Your Mind? Ronnie is a little kind of out there and acting a little almost Alice Cooperish, I would say. Like there's kind of a drama to what he's doing on here, and there's a lot of spaces in the songs. They're kind of stripped down and stark and hitting you hard, but they're not that slow in general. They are they're not super fast, and the production is not meticulous on it. It's really kind of raw and grinding, but no, I just remember at the time, we're running Brave Words of Bloody Knuckles at the time is just kind of starting up, and 96, so we're 2 years into it at that point. This came out October 15th, 96, and I just remember having no real problem with it, and people were scathing about Angry Machines. So there you go, Dio, Angry Machines.
Yeah, I mean, I like that album and Strange Highways. I think those are my two favorites from the kind of 90s and onwards albums, to be quite honest with you. And I appreciate the rawness of them. They're both tremendously heavy albums. Yeah, maybe not as polished as some of the earlier stuff, and maybe, but I thought that was okay. To me, it was almost like an extension of what Ronnie and Sabbath did on Dehumanizer.
Yeah, good point.
And I don't have an issue with that at all. So yeah, looking back, I absolutely prefer those two. I agree with you over Magica and the final album. I kind of like Lock Up the Wolves, but I think these two are pretty fine albums. I totally dig them.
Cool, excellent.
So I'm going to stay in kind of like the Sabbath camp here. So this album, savaged by many people back in the day. I think kind of time has been a little kinder to it. But I still talk to plenty of people who despise this album. And I'm talking about Seven Star, Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi, you know, also with Glenn Hughes on vocals and a whole cast of characters that were never in Sabbath before playing in the band. You know, originally this was supposed to be a Tony Iommi solo album. And of course, the record label convinced Tony to release it as a Black Sabbath album, much to Glenn Hughes's horror, because I think Glenn just thought he was going to be singing on a Tony Iommi solo album. And now, you know, now I'm fronting Black Sabbath. And of course, Glenn had massive drug problems at the time. And I think, you know, we know the whole story. They go out on tour. He gets into a fight with one of the roadies or whatever. You know, he's just not in good shape. He gets his punch to the throat. He can't sing. I happened to see one of the shows. It was awful, but that's the story for another day. To the album, I think this is a fine album, and I loved it when it came out. Again, I may be a little biased because of my love for both Sabbath and Black Sabbath, Sabbath and Deep Purple. So there's the whole kind of meeting of the two here, just like the Born Again album. But man, the songs are just so good on here. They're so melodic. Maybe it doesn't quite sound like traditional Black Sabbath, but I think it's just a great heavy rock record. It's not really a metal album, I don't think. It's more of just Sabbath doing heavy, really heavy bluesy rock. But man, In for the Kill, Turn to Stone, the title track, Danger Zone. You got the bluesy Heart Like a Wheel and Angry Heart. You know, they kind of, I think the big mistake when this album came out is that they released No Stranger to Love, the kind of soft, syrupy ballad, as the first track. And people were like, what is this nonsense? And I think that was the biggest mistake that they ever did, because granted, yeah, it's the catchiest song on the album. These kind of power ballady things were very popular at the time, but this is Black Sabbath, right? You're not supposed to do something like that. So I think that essentially killed this album, and then the tour didn't do it any favors afterwards. They bring in Ray Gillen, and you know, the thing just explodes from within. But I think listening back, I love this album. I still play it all the time, and I think it's one of Glenn Hughes's best vocal performances on any album. So there you have it.
Yeah, what I like about that record is it feels like an album made by grown-ups, right? Eternal Idol somewhat does as well. Eternal Idol is just banging awesome songs start to finish. I often say that just it randomly, all the best songs from the entire Tony Martin era swooped down and all landed on Eternal Idol. Don't know why, but that's what I think. But you know, you get to Headless Cross and Tear and those records, they don't quite sound like as grown up as, you know, and it's really because of the lyrical point of view. It's like you're trying to write a spooky Black Sabbath album forevermore sort of thing, all the way up to 13, frankly, right? But that record, it just seems like, okay, it's a little bit like the Ian Gillan thing, where it's like, no, I'm gonna write my own, you know, lyrics that are gonna be, you know, idiosyncratically Ian Gillanish. You get the same thing here. He comes in, Glenn Hughes comes in and says, you know, I'm not gonna write about, you know, witches flying through the sky and stuff like that. And so it just feels like a grown-up record. And that's what I like about it. And the production's great. It seems awesome, like a major label album, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, but, you know, the problem is if they release it as a Tony Iommi solo album, it doesn't do any business anyway, right? That's just the nature of the beast. So I don't know. I think if people can just kind of accept it for what it is, there's great songs on the album. Really great songs on the album. So I've dug it since day one, but I still see some people like, or just won't accept it for what it is, and whatever.
Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. Okay, so my second choice is, what is the name of the band here? Jimmy Page Robert Plant is the name of the band on this one. Walking into Clarksdale. Love this record to death. Loved it the moment it came out, April 21st, 1998. It got pretty maligned and pretty ignored, although I think it went gold, I believe. Anyways, and I saw the tour. The tour was awesome. The only other thing they ever made was, let me check that again, Jimmy Page Robert Plant. Yeah, so this is also called Jimmy Page Robert Plant. You know, widely called Page Plant, I guess is what we call this band. No Quarter, which was just kind of like a wishy-washy couple of originals, remakes, you know, haha, we're Moroccan and all that kind of thing, right? But this record, you know, I've gone so far as to say, you know, famously up there with the Jethro Tull would be better without the flute comments. I've in combative mode rated this with Led Zeppelin albums, and it comes in literally, if I smoosh them all together, I've got this somewhere in the range of third, fourth, fifth of all the catalogs put together. That's how much I love this album. I thought it's Jimmy's best work since probably at least Presence, I would say. Jimmy's all over it. It's grinding, kind of lo-fi. It's kind of like heavy Robert Plant of his later years when he was still kind of rocking out. It was made in something like 36 days, so they put it together really fast. Robert's vocals get a little bit of stick, and I can understand why. They're kind of like he's a little wild and chaotic and all over the place on it. But I love I buy into the whole idea of the Zeppish Moroccan thing when they're making new originals rather than on here where they're just like doing the haha versions of the older songs sort of thing. But Shining in the Light, When the World Was Young, Blue Train, Please Read This Letter, which got redone with Alison Krauss. Most High was kind of a bit of a single on it, I believe. But I just thought it was really good. Steve Albini is in on the mix and stuff. Michael Lee is the drummer, so he's pounding away. Sadly, we lost him. I got to meet him actually backstage at a Thin Lizzy show, which was also the time I got to meet John Sykes, and never had that interview with Milk Carton John Sykes that, he gave me his phone number. I lost it, never could find him. So that's a whole nother story. But it was nice to meet Michael Lee. He was a super nice guy, the drummer, and he just pounds his way through this album. And I think, that's right. So the other nice thing about this record is Jimmy and Robert give the whole thing a full band credit. Everybody gets credit on this record, and it sounds like a band record. Yeah. So I just wish this would have got more of a look in. It's absolutely, I would say it's probably my third favorite thing of everything any Led Zeppelin member did. Outside of Led Zeppelin after 1980, I would put it, certainly after Principle of Moments, and then after probably the debut, or maybe Fate of Nations as well. But it's way up there. Great album. People should give it another listen. There you go.
Yeah, and it showed that they still had it together. I mean, yeah.
The Lost Led Zeppelin album is almost what I call it, because it sounds like it absolutely could have been a Led Zeppelin album.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. I dig it. I think it's really, really good. Very enjoyable. Man, that John Sykes Milk Carton bit has legs forever, huh?
Yeah. I'm standing there talking to him. We're having a great time. He's a super nice guy. Yeah, here's my phone number. Give me a call sometime. Yeah, we'll do that interview. If you want to do an interview someday. I've never talked to him again. It's like a mirage.
Maybe we'll get that new album one of these days. It keeps like putting out these songs every so often, every 6 months or whatever, You sometimes, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love John. I want him to release the album, but you got to wonder if people will be talking about the Milk Carton thing long before he ever releases that damn album. It's like crazy.
I don't know if I made that clear, but the reason those two guys were together, this is backstage at Massey Hall, it was Thin Lizzy, right? Fronted by him. Yeah. And I think they were sporting Deep Purple.
They were. They were. Yep. Yeah, I saw that tour as well. Yeah, that was pretty fun. That was good. All right, my next choice, Dream Theater, Train of Thought.
Right.
So another one of those albums that personally I love the minute I got it. This album has taken a lot of crap from fans and from critics for many years, basically because, I mean, this is Dream Theater's, it's often been labeled Dream Theater's metallic album, because it is a full-on heavy assault, and all the prog rock fans who love this band heard this and like shrank away in horror. Oh my God, all this heavy metal, too many big Metallica riffs. It's like Dream Theater trying to do a mix of Metallica and Black Sabbath. I hate it. It's too heavy. Where's all the subtlety? Blah, 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 blah. And I think people are just, it's a heavy album. Yeah, there's less keyboards on it. Yeah, this is like John Petrucci's big, massive album. But the band were really into doing something like this. They always had it in them. They had stuff like this on every single album. And, quite frankly, if you listen to a lot of Dream Theater albums, especially like earlier in the catalog, I mean, every album sounds completely different. They go for a different vibe each and every time out. And this one is no different. I mean, As I Am, In the Name of God, This Dying Breed. I mean, this is some great, really memorable songs on here, memorable choruses, memorable riffs. It's got, a lot of epics on here. but I just think it's just a great, straightforward metal album that has its proggy moments for sure. But I never got all the hate. And, I saw them on this tour. They were absolutely terrific. They played like probably half the songs. People got into it live. But, looking back, I think people are a little kinder to it today. But man, I remember this getting savaged by the fans, and mainly the fans I'm talking about, who just, put the big X all over this and were like, no, this is not the Dream Theater we want. Meanwhile, I didn't care. But so I guess, this divided the fan base a little bit, because there was a lot of fans who liked them for their more progressive nature stuff, with all the keyboards and big melodic hooks and all that sort of thing. But this was the kind of the heavy beast that was always lurking underneath. I mean, Mike Portnoy makes no bones about his love for really, really heavy music. And, it all came out here. So I never had an issue with this. I still play this a lot to this day. And, but when you talk to most people, especially hardcore Dream Theater fans, when they talk about their favorite albums, you never see this anywhere near the top. And it's a shame, because I think it's one of their better ones.
And yet again, before nobody said don't make a record like this. And I bet you $1 million, if you would have asked a bunch of Dream Theater fans before that album came out, hey, we're thinking of making a super heavy record, they probably would have said great. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of one of those, it's really kind of what you expect the fans would want, but soon as you deliver it, that's a whole show, and that's a whole thing. Like there's a dozen albums like that I can think of that are give the people what they want albums, right? That album is really kind of a give the people what they want. Like I say, no fan would have said, I don't want a record like that before it came out.
Yeah.
If you would have said in interviews ahead of time, 6 months, a year ahead of time, well, we're thinking of making a real heavy record, I bet you every single Dream Theater fan would have said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do that, right? And as soon as they do it, that's when you go, I guess we didn't really need it, right?
Yeah. It's
and the black and white album cover too, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Makes
it's
a
definitely
difference.
Kind of dark looking and whatnot. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, it reminds me of something that D. Snyder said to me the other day. He was talking about his, last couple solo albums, and he was like, if I go out and do an album that sounds just like Twisted Sister, everybody complains that you're harking on your past and you haven't moved on to do something different. But then if I go out and do something completely different, they complain that it doesn't sound enough like Twisted Sister. So no matter what I do, I can't win. And I was like, yeah, that's the way it is nowadays, right?
Yeah. Funny. Yeah. Okay. So here's a little bit of a weird one for this. So again, along these lines of albums that, are disliked or were completely ignored at the time. And this fits into a genre that is like that as well. I'm going with Kik Tracee, No Rules. This is late period hair metal. Absolutely ignored band. They had one of the worst kiddie names, with Kik Tracee EE at the end. That sinks them right there.
Plus, I've never heard of them. I've never heard.
Okay, well, here you go. So I'll tell you a little bit what they are. They're essentially the Baby Slaughter, and they're produced by Dana Strum. So if you like Slaughter, which I actually really liked Slaughter, what I liked about them is the high screechy vocals and the weird high screechy production and the chaotic drums and the kind of like loose, almost Who-like feel of the band. They had a real distinct sound. I really bought into them. This is their second album. I loved the first one with Fly to the Angels and all that. And they got a lot of abuse as well. So along comes a baby version of them, but they're just smarter and cooler. And because it is late hair metal, they're a little bit more interesting and introspective, and you're already into that try harder end of hair metal where they're thinking we have to actually come to the table with a little bit more intellectual grist. And they cover Mrs. Robinson on here and do like a Slaughter version of Mrs. Robinson, but Don't Need No Rules, You're So Strange. Like, it really sounds a lot like Slaughter. Their lead vocalist, his name was Steven Shiro, and he's very much like a Mark Slaughter kind of guy. But they only had the one full-length album, and then they followed it up with the No Rules Field Trip EP. So this had, 6 songs on it. And you even see, so this is 1992 and the debut is 1991. So not a lot of space between them. But you see the picture of the band, they're looking like your basically toned down 1991 version of hair metal. And then you get to Field Trip. and they've got the flannel on, right? So there you go. Now we got to look a little grungy. And I mean, almost every song across both of these things. So a full length album with, I think, 14 songs on it, and then an EP with 6. So together you kind of almost got a full album. Just a good ignored late period hair metal band that I just bought into because I loved that eccentric extreme Slaughter sound, and they were the baby Slaughter. So there you go. Kik Tracee, No Rules.
Cool. So I want to digress for a second and clear something up here. Little mini rant in the middle of this show. So we generally have a handful of people that have a real problem with us mentioning hair metal on this channel. All right. And a lot of it gets directed towards Martin. And, you know, usually the comment is like, oh, Martin always uses this hair metal term. He hates hair metal. He hates all those bands. Hair metal's not fair. It's so, you know, it's speaking bad about these bands. Quite frankly, every time Martin mentions any of these bands that might be considered hair metal, he talks glowingly about them. So I want everybody to understand the hair metal in this instance, when mentioned on this show, for the most part, especially by Martin, does not mean something derogative. Martin, you want to back that up a little bit? I mean, I get crazy when I see these comments.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we've talked about this before. It's just a very concrete and solid term. We know exactly what it means. It's all from California. It started in 83. It ended in 92, 93, right? It's just this 10-year period. We all know what it means. The bands kind of all had a similar look. And yeah, I loved a lot of it. I mean, I guess I've been pretty vocal in not being a Bon Jovi fan, and not particularly a Cinderella and a Poison fan at the time, but tons and tons of other bands from the early stuff to the late stuff. I bought in. I love tons of that stuff. So yeah. I've no problem with it, but I know that does come up a lot, that people just don't like the term for some reason. But every other term is there's nothing else that even comes close. People talk about melodic rock or AOR. You know, AOR means a million different things, right? Album oriented rock. Melodic rock is
glam metal, although a lot of these bands I wouldn't even call metal, right? But there's the glam side. We didn't come up with the term, guys. Like, hair metal was created by, I don't know who coined that term. Definitely wasn't us. So, but there's millions and millions of people who use that. It's just really to describe a style of band from a certain time period. It's like, coming from us doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. So
and people often argue that that a lot of the big thrash bands had pretty poofy hair too, right? So
that is very true, and they did, right? Yep, they did. All right, back to the topic at hand. So this particular album from this particular band actually did very big business. I'm more kind of coming at it from over time. Fans of this band, this is a tough one. So people who don't know much about this band probably only know this album and like this album. But true fans of this band who followed them from the beginning tend to detest this album because it was a really big seller. It had a couple hit singles on it. And, the style of the music on the album is a little bit different than the early stuff, which was fairly much in the progressive rock realm. I'm talking about LA's Ambrosia 180. All right. Pretty terrible. That album cover is awful. And, they're looking all kind of spiffy, and, we got the nice clothes, and we're making a little bit of money. Yes, we love our, life in yacht rock and all this kind of stuff. Because, of course, this had the You're the Only Woman on it, which was a huge hit. Had a couple other minor hits on. The Biggest Part of Me was also a big hit as well. But coming from their first couple albums, which were really adventurous, like progressive rock, but still with that kind of little, the hooks and all that sort of thing, this was a big departure, but still a really good rock album. And I'm amazed at how many like Ambrosia fans I meet, especially love the procs that they're like, oh God, that awful 180 album, have no use for it. But Ready is a great rock song. Shape I'm In, also a great rock song. You got the awesome Kamikaze, Rockin' a Hard Place kicks ass, a good hard rocker. Crying in the Rain, no big deal. And I even like the hits. I think the hits are great. It's good, like kind of poppy AOR, soft rock, yacht rock, whatever you want to call it. But these guys were superb musicians. Half of the band sang. They got all the great vocal harmonies. I think this is one of the great kind of like pop rock albums of that era. You're talking like Player and all those, Pablo Cruz we mentioned, but there's a lot more adventurous playing on this album than a lot of those other bands. And I think you could you could easily say stack this band and this album up against some of the stuff that Journey was putting out at the time, maybe Styx as well. You know, any of those kind of bands that had, like, you know, Toto's another example. You know, bands that were all really serious players put out really good rockin' albums that had a couple big hits, but people kind of put them down for those big hits because the hits were kind of like not like a lot of the stuff that they normally would do. So yeah, I thought this was kind of a no-brainer pick for this, although a little bit different. So 180 from Ambrosia.
Cool. Yeah, I can't really speak to that band. I have a few vinyls, but I got to check that trajectory to that album. It's funny hearing you say, when I meet Ambrosia fans, it's like, in what world are we talking around, you know, walking around meeting Ambrosia fans, right? So it's so funny, right?
Well, because you know, their first two albums are pretty legendary in prog rock circles because they are full on, you know, prog rock, and people were like, oh, keep going with that. But then of course, you know, this comes out right as we're getting ready to go into the 80s here. And like all these prog rock bands, they changed, right? They had to kind of conform with the time. So most prog fans shit all over this because it was a massive hit, because they had, you know, big singles, and because the album isn't prog enough, right? So it's still a really good rock album, I think.
Okay, so so my next choice is this one, Rolling Stones, Their Satanic Majesty's Request. You know, they were the famous narrative about this record is that, oh, look at the Rolling Stones, they're trying psych, you know, they're not a psych band, they're obviously a good, gritty, authentic blues band. They've been proving that and inventing this blues boom essentially single-handedly, really, if you think about it. I mean, it morphed a lot after them, but before this, you know, Between the Buttons is considered kind of cool as well. Maybe their Revolver, I suppose, right? But this was always considered their cash in on psych. You know, seeing them even dress all psych and stuff, it just doesn't feel that authentic. But the thing is, I think they do an amazing job of psych on this. I think this album's a lot of fun, start to finish. I never had any problem with it. You know, it's cool that Kiss covered 2000 Man. It's cool that The Damned covered Citadel. You know, it's got 2000 Light Years from Home. To me, this is, remember when we did that XTC episode, which was so cool. You know, Dukes of Stratosphere, when they did their you know, faux parody of a 60s psych band. This reminds me of that, because the Stones pull out all the stops and have all the weird sounds in there, you know, all the loopy recording techniques and the sitar and all that. And I think they just entertain the pants off of you right from start to finish all over this record. I was perfectly fine with it. And it almost proves how awesome the Stones are, in that they could just wade into this and take over and dominate with this record. But yeah, they got a lot of heck for it. And of course, you know, butted up against Sgt. Pepper. That was the other reason they got a lot of heck for it too, because even that picture is a very Sgt. Peppery.
Oh yeah, totally.
Right. Yeah. So you know, not too many psych bands even really went this far. That's the other thing about it. It's like because this is almost like a parody of a psych record, they went further than most psych bands. And so when you play all those other psych classics, they just don't sound as goofy and fun and full of sound effects as when you go in and make a parody of a psych record. So yeah, never from day one when I heard this. Granted, I didn't hear it as a new release, and I didn't read the reviews as a new release. I was only 4 years old or something. But never ever had a problem with this album. I was perfectly fine with it. So there you go.
You have to wonder, and I guess only the guys could answer the question, but if they were just kind of like, yeah, everybody's doing this, we're going to show you that we can do it too. But then because they went right back to doing what they were doing afterwards, they were like, yeah. We got that out of our system. That's not really what us, but you know, we can do it also if we wanted to. We'll make some money doing it.
Yeah, very true. They're back into kind of modernized versions of their early sound. Except for Beggar's Banquet, which I love a lot, and Exile, which are more acoustic and a little bit more folky, I suppose, than your harder hitting Stone stuff and the big hits and that. But yeah, you're right. It was a one-off, wasn't it?
Yeah. It's a fun listen. Not necessarily what I want the Stones to be doing, I guess, but the fact that they, you know, went and did that, you know, it's a cool oddity in their catalog that is fun to revisit from time to time. And it's always cool for a band like that, any band, to go and do an album that's so completely about face from what they normally do. Yeah, you got to give him credit for that. I thought it was fun. All right, so my next album here, so this comes into the kind of category of a legacy band whose latter part of their catalog is pretty much ignored by so many people, especially their like loyal, long-standing fans. And almost any album of theirs gets shit on from this period. So I could have picked any of them. I decided to go with God and Guns by Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Right.
You know, like the old time 70s Skynyrd fans hate anything the newer version has put out ever, I think, right? Because it's like, you know, it's a tribute band, it's a cover band, there's, you know, nobody left but Gary, and how dare they release new music under the Lynyrd Skynyrd name, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm of the opinion, I enjoy all the more recent Lynyrd Skynyrd albums. You know, if you kind of forget all that and just listen to it on pure musical terms, these are all really good modern Southern rock / country rock albums with, I mean, there could be on any of these albums, I know you're a fan, Martin, so it's like there could be hit singles on all these albums, like fun songs that are just extensions of what the band was doing, you know, back in the 70s, you know, Sweet Home Alabama. There's plenty of Sweet Home Alabama type of tracks on this album and all the other ones that have come out over the last decade and a half, 2 decades, you know, Southern Ways, Unwrite That Song. I mean, there's, you know, that, granted, a lot of people have had an issue with Skynyrd kind of ramming down our throats this whole Americana thing, and we're proud Americans and we're from the South. And I get that. I get that can be a little bit of a turnoff for some people. But you know what? If you just like this kind of music, I mean, you know, Still Unbroken, good hard rocking tune. Simple Life got a great hook. Little Thing Called You. The title track is awesome. Good heavy Southern rock song. I don't know. I enjoy these albums. I play these and the other ones all the time. And I'm amazed at how many Lynyrd Skynyrd fans just ignore or just really just crap all over these albums. And I don't really think they've even heard them. That's the thing, you know?
Yeah.
You go to see Skynyrd live and they play like maybe a song or two for any of these recent albums, and people just run to the bathroom in the bar. And it's just like, I don't know that. It's not from the 70s. I can't get into it. I'm like, really? Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. And I, as far as like the critics and how the critics have taken these, I get the impression that the critics have kind of ignored most of these albums as well. So, and I think it's a shame because there's a lot of good music on a lot of these more recent Skynyrd albums.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you buy into the whole world and environment and philosophy of new country ever as part of what you listen to, this is like heavy metal new country for you. Right. And these records are essentially identical to modern day Molly Hatchet as well. And I love the hell out of those records too. So yeah, I love, you know, this is the heavy Lynyrd Skynyrd, and Molly Hatchet now is the heavy version of the Molly Hatchet, which wasn't that heavy back then. Right. Yeah. So it's kind of cool. And you know, I think some of the abuse also comes in for the fact that the recordings are all just super efficient and perfect and glossy. Not a lot of arrangement, not a lot of weird stuff in it. Well, that's the other, you know, way to denigrate them is that they're really conservative. I mean, you're really getting, you know, the stripped down, the absolute essence of what you know, what you're going to expect from, you know, what we've called before Walmart Southern rock, right? Yeah, it's got a little bit of that to it, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not the kind of like Southern swamp rock, the gritty stuff that the band were releasing back in the day. But you know, we're talking 40 years later, so it's it definitely, there is a sheen and a almost too perfect kind of feeling to these albums. I get you. I totally get you on that. But you know, I mean, the songs are really good and they rock. So I don't know, but I think you have to wonder sometimes if people really dislike the songs and the albums, or they dislike the fact that Skynyrd is continuing on with just one original member. Yeah. And because I know a lot of people have issues with these legacy bands when, you know, one guy's gone, 2 guys gone, let alone half the band, or, you know, 80% of the band. So, and still calling themselves by the name. So I don't know.
Cool. All right. My last choice. So I pulled out 3 of these to compare them, but it's Iggy Pop's Soldier. We did an episode of our YouTube thing, The Contrarians, where I picked this as my favorite Iggy Pop album. It's a bit of a contrarian choice, but it's liked kind of the most from the what I call the goofball years, the Arista years of Iggy Pop. Soldiers in the Middle. This is the one that's kind of liked the least, and I notched back from picking this one. This one's a little more R&B-ish, I imagine. I would say, if we were to generalize about it, but what I like about Soldier and this whole thing. So again, these albums are kind of put down because, you know, if you're being a rock critic's darling kind of a snob about Iggy Pop, you're absolutely supposed to love The Idiot and Lust for Life, the two Berlin albums, the black and white albums the most, you know, that represents Iggy at his artistically highest, right? But these are just a lot of fun. These Arista albums, like I say, they're the goofball years. They're comedic and strange with Knocking Them Down in the City, I'm a Conservative, which is a heavy one on here, I Snub You. There's a lot of kind of like thrashing around in the space between punk and new wave on it. A lot of funny sounds, like Loco Mosquitoes, like completely comedic. So is Dog Food. I Need More, Mr. Dynamite. There's some kind of darker, more introspective stuff on it as well, but almost a little bit like Satanic Majesty's Request. It's like a laugh a minute. It's just all very interesting and entertaining. New Values, on the other hand, is a little more stripped down and a little more serious. And like I say, that 79 album is absolutely my favorite. But this is basically Iggy working with Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols. And it's just, like I say, it's a lot of bells and whistles. It's a lot of cheap laughs. It's really showy. And for that reason, it's just a lot of fun. But also for that reason, the Arista years and this record are really kind of put down.
That dent the charts at all when it came out?
No, these records, nothing from this era was successful at all for him. He didn't have any success again until, you know, the horrible Blah 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 and Real Wild Child, and then Candy and Home, and those records, those really glossy ones where it's really obvious he's just cashing in. But he didn't do any of that super commercial stuff until the mid 80s. Yeah. And then he did it a little bit, and he actually kind of had a bit of a hit with some of that stuff, which isn't very good.
What's amazing is he was on that label, and yet they weren't doing anything to push those albums.
Yeah, it was RCA, then Arista, and then he's been on a number of different labels. But yeah, and Arista, I don't think is really considered all that great a label. They were never that aggressive in doing a good job for people. But yeah, Iggy's just in a weird place at this point, just thrashing around, not knowing what to do, just kind of putting out a lot of weird music. Zombie Birdhouse is the weirdest of all of them. That's, I think, his 83 album, and this one I think is 80. But yeah, it's like I say, it's the Berlin years are the ones you're supposed to love the most, right?
Yeah. All right, my final pick for today. So this album was released in 2002, 2003. Styx, Cyclorama.
Right.
So, you know, this is a time where most people are like, all right, so the guys in Styx and Dennis DeYoung are not playing together. They're not recording together anymore. There's no Dennis. So we're just going to, you know, ignore this album. And yeah, Styx just kind of at this time, kind of, other than as a touring act, kind of ceased to exist from a, you know, album standpoint for people. And I think I was kind of guilty when this came out. I was like, I bought it and I was like, all right. I listened to it a handful of times and I kind of put it on the shelf and just kind of like forgot about it for many, many years. But then I decided to revisit it. And this is a really, really strong record. So this is the end of the kind of the Glenn Burtnick era of the band. He's playing bass and keyboards and singing as well. But you have, you know, Lawrence Gowan is here and Todd Zuckerman is here. Of course, you got Tommy and JY and Mr. Panozzo here. But this is right before the Ricky Phillips joining the band, he's still there to this day. But so many people at the time were saying how un-Styx-like this album sounds. And obviously this is coming post new metal. music once again is changing. How can Styx fit into this whole, decade and what have you as we move into the 2000s? I think this is a terrific record. I think, you got some great songwriting as the dogs go absolutely ballistic behind me. Tommy is in rare form on this album. We got Do Things My Way, Waiting for Our Time. Kiss Your Ass Goodbye is a great kind of soothing kind of soaring ballad from him. You've got These Are the Times, which is an absolutely terrific song. I think These Are the Times should have been a huge hit for them. You got Captain America. There's some good JY rockers on here. It kind of has all the elements you would expect from a really good Styx album. The keyboards are there, the guitars are there, the soaring multi-part harmonies, all that stuff. Maybe it's a little long. There are a lot of tracks on here. It's a long album, but I think this album holds up really, really well. And I'm just surprised at how many people either just automatically counted this album out or just never bothered to listen to it. It didn't do any business back in the day when it came out. I think the critics and the fans just kind of ignored it, gave it a listen, and that was that. But man, I tell you, if you haven't listened to Cyclorama in a long time, worst album cover ever. I think we can all agree on that, but wonderful, wonderful stuff. I think, if it holds up. I'm a big fan of the two most recent Styx albums. And I think this is better than the stuff they did in the 90s when Dennis was back in the band by far. So there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like the start of the new Styx, and it's very Shaw, and it's also very Shaw Blades. That whole time where he had a real Beatlesque feel to what he's doing, beautifully produced. The Lawrence Gowan era is he really brings a lot to the band. Yeah. There's just kind of a new feel, a lot of layering of acoustics and electrics and things like that. It just seems like a more melodic band and a less keyboardy band at the same time. I think there's really a lot of similarity between that and Shaw Blades of the era at that point.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So yeah, and it's funny because after they released that album and it was just so universally ignored, the band were just basically like, why should we make albums anymore? Look at how many years it took them to make The Mission, which came out in 2017. So we're looking a long time, a long time, because they were just like, nobody's buying new music from us old timers, so why should we bother? And now they've done, two in fairly quick succession, right? Because they realize that, there are people out there who still want to hear new music from us. So.
Cool. Right on.
So there you have it, everybody. Some additional albums that most people seem to dislike that we really kind of dig quite a bit. So part 2 of 2. Yeah. Will there be a third down the line? I don't know. I think Martin and I have had a lot of fun just doing these kind of 2-part little topics, right? Because sometimes once you get to part 3, it gets a little watered down. But I think this was fun. So Martin, what do you got cooking on the book side of things and on the contrarians?
Just kind of writing away and essentially, just martinpopoff.com for anything that's in stock. This is usually the quiet period. You don't really see a lot of book sales in the middle of the summer, but definitely getting a lot of writing done and a few projects that I guess I can't really talk about, but actually I'll just say generally, looks like I'll be doing another 3 books for a pretty big publisher. So I've lined up a bunch of work for the next year kind of thing. So
cool. That's always good. That's always good news. And you guys are pretty busy over on the Contrarians these days.
Yep. Doing a lot there. We just did Marco did a Black Sabbath, and we just knocked off a Dio episode of a regular one. Marco's been doing some Patreon exclusive stuff. We've got our buddy Tim Derling in. They're going to do a Y&T version of the Contrarians, the regular show. He's got a really contrarian choice for his favorite Y&T album, but he's a total Y&T expert, so it's worth listening to, right? So pretty busy. And the podcast is busy. So
Y&T fans are interesting because I think for the casual fans, they generally gravitate towards a couple of albums, right? But I know some people who are really big into them. They pick these weird albums, really early on the catalog, really later in the catalog as the ones to really seek out. And I like all the Y&T stuff, but I don't know if I would call the first album or one of the later albums, definitely their best. But hey, it's all up to the individual.
Yeah,
So I would.
I'd probably go Mean Streak for my favorite, which isn't a contrarian choice, I don't think at all. So
Yeah, I like Earthshaker myself, but
yeah, that's pretty incredible too. The lost weird one in the middle, right?
yeah.
Where, you know, the non-heavy metal year, I think that was 1979, right? Famous year where there's no heavy metal going on, kind of in too many places in America, anyways. So
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. There you have it, everybody. So if there are any albums that you feel that most people hate, that you dislike, that you really like quite a bit, put them into the comments below. Coming up on the channel, we've got, hopefully, if I can get to it, I've got some crazy things going on this weekend, but we hope to get to ranking the albums this weekend of Gravedigger. Well, it's going to be like a top 5 thing that with Rich Catino and Bryce from Bryce Talks Metal. Rich is also going to rank the Gamma Ray albums. I think we're also doing Running Wild ranking this weekend, and George Lamy and I are going to give you some of our top picks for 80s fusion albums. So that's coming up this weekend. And of course, Monday we've got the Hudson Valley Squares. Tuesday in the Prague seat with special guest Stephen Reed. Wednesday is new product review day. Thursday, of course, the Monsters Den. And then, Martin will be back next Friday. So stay tuned for that. And a lot more here on the channel. I am Pete Pardo. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. Have a good weekend, everybody. From Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Take care.